Genesis chapter 33, family. When you go through this chapter, you will see a family reconciling. For you to appreciate what is happening in this chapter, you have to go back a few chapters to see what Jacob had done to Esau, where he brings him to a point where he's giving him, I think, 1,000 cattle, 1,000 sheep and goats to appease his brother's wrath. So now, when you go back to a few chapters back, I think chapter 30 and so, when you come with it, Isaac, the father, wanted to bless the firstborn, who is Esau, but Jacob managed to trick his father because he was old and blind, could not see. He tricked him, and he tricked Esau out of his because this firstborn blessing, and he also tricked him out of his birthright. He cooked him a game or something, and then he ate, and then he gave him his birthright. But when all that and he reached the conclusion, Esau was so angry that he wanted to kill his own brother, so he had to run away. He ran to stay with his uncle Laban. So now, 25 years later or so, when they come back, he comes back and tries to amend his relationship with his brother. His heart has changed towards him. He no longer wants to kill him. You know what? He has even forgiven him to a point now he doesn't even want to take the gifts that he was trying to give her. So, but he insisted. So, but now when you look at that chapter, you see a family reconciling. So, time has a way of healing wounds, family. But I'm not saying it's going to be easy, but we should give time to work per se. But I want us to look in this chapter. When we look at this chapter, I want us to look at the dangers of harboring unforgiveness. And for us to tie some few notes, let us look at Matthew 18, verse 21. I think Paul says in Philippians 2, have this mind that Christ had. Have this mind in you that Christ had. So now, what's the type of attitude or the mindset that Christ had when it comes to forgiveness? Let us turn to Matthew 18. Matthew 18, starting at verse 21, it reads as follows. Then Peter came to Jesus and asked, Lord, how many times shall I forgive my brother or sister who sins against me? Up to 7 times? Apparently, it was a custom of the time. When somebody offends you, your brother or sister offends you, you should forgive them like up to 3 times. It's 3 times. So Peter sneaks in 7 times, but it was like you had to forgive them 3 times. Afterwards, it was like, hey, on what, young Joel? The synagogue would deal with you. But Peter introduces 7 times. Why 7? Remember, 7 is the number of God, number of completion. So maybe he was saying, you know what, after I've forgiven you 7 times, a number of perfection, afterwards, something has to be done. But listen to what Jesus Christ says in the next verse. Jesus answered, I tell you, not even 7 times, but 77 times 7, 70 times 7. So basically he was implying that you should not keep a record when you forgive your brother or sister, because 70 times is like 490 or something like along those lines. So how many times you're going to have to forgive somebody for offending you? And if that person offends you so many times, there's something wrong with that person. But now, look at what Christ says, that you must forgive without keeping a record. So now to further explain that, he gives them the parable where he says there was a king who wanted to settle his accounts, He had people who owed him as a king. So now the first guy he deals with, the servant, owed him 100,000 gold coins. And then as he was dealing with them, the guy pleaded for mercy and said, ask for more time, to say, give me time to organize, and then I'll come pay you. So the king agreed. And then after the guy leaves the king's presence, he bumps into somebody who owed him money. So now the same thing, he owed him like 100,000 silver coins. And then the guy also asked for mercy from this guy, but this guy refused to forgive him. He got the jailers to take him, they threw him in jail to pay his penance, or to torture him to a point where he has to pay. But when the other peasants saw what was happening, or the subjects of the king saw what was happening, they went and reported this guy to the king, because he had received mercy from the king, but he refused to extend the same mercy. But when the king heard this, he also retracted his mercy and got the guy, he got thrown into prison, where he was also tortured till he can pay the man. So now the moral of that parable, the king in this instance would be God, you know. God forgives us our sins, our transgressions. But when our brothers and sisters, in return, when they asked from us to forgive them their transgression, to forgive them their sin, we tend to behave like this servant who refused. So now we need to learn to forgive 70 times 7 times 7 and not keep a record. And that's the moral of the story, to say we should learn to forgive and not harbor unforgiveness, because we might find ourselves also being kicked out and find ourselves being kicked into Hades or a prison to be tortured like that servant. So now, as I was doing my research, looking at what are the dangers of harboring unforgiveness, number one would be it imprisons you to the past. What do I mean? It says unforgiveness is like having a scar. And now that scar, whenever it tries to heal and starts closing up, you open up that scar and you expose the wound all over again. Thus, it keeps you fixated at the point where you got hurt. It keeps you who hurt you, how you got hurt. So you keep reliving that hurt instead of forgiving and moving on. So unforgiveness takes you back to that point where you got hurt. So you're constantly getting hurt and not healing. So it has a tendency of imprisoning us to the past. So when we forgive, we can move into the future and move into a brighter future and start seeing life in a different perspective. Because the other thing unforgiveness does is it produces bitterness. And how it does that, you know, when you're constantly in pain, like that guy, when you're constantly in pain, you end up producing bitterness. You end up seeing life through a prism of negativity, the half full glass type of person. And those type of people, nobody really wants to hang around those people. So now unforgiveness tends to lead us to bitterness, and you become sarcastic, and life is just sour for you. So now we should learn to forgive so that we don't find ourselves having that type of attitude where we affect other people with our bitterness. So not the least, but the last aspect that we want to look at would be having unforgiveness opens the door for the devil to start doing whatever he does. You know, John 10:10, the thief has come to kill, steal, and destroy. So unforgiveness opens that door. Let us look at 2 Corinthians chapter 2. We will read from verse 10. It says, "Anyone you forgave, I also forgave. And what I have forgiven, if there was anything to forgive, I have forgiven in the sight of Christ for your sake, in order that Satan might not outwit us, for we are not unaware of his schemes." So now, Paul says that we open up a door if we don't forgive one another for Satan to work his schemes. So now, family, we need to learn to forgive and become like Esau and Jacob, where we become reconciled with our loved ones.